thanks a lot for being here again. It's a big honor to start this conference today here with Stephen. And as Yolanda said before, our aim for me and my teammates as interviewer is to guide you, to bring you close to the personalities we have here on stage, on our couch, like 15 years, since 15 years. And today we have the great pleasure to have here Stephen King. And Stephen, you have been here with Luminate. You are in Luminate. You are not only somebody who sees under construction, but how it is in construction, but you back those who are doing the construction work actually. How did you come there, and how did you make it to this point?
Great. Well, firstly, thank you, Jan, for having me, and to Yolanda and to Ciba Voluntarius. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the discussion over the next day or so. Luminate's story is an unusual one. We were founded as a global philanthropic organization by a man called Pierre Omidyar, and he was the founder of eBay. He's a software engineer. He's somebody who famously invented the code for eBay one Labor Day weekend in his garage. It sounds a very familiar story about sort of early tech entrepreneurship. And then he had a decision to make. After 4 or 5 years, eBay floated. They suddenly became very wealthy. Was he going to spend all his money on yachts and diamonds, or was he going to think about how he can give something back to the world? So with his wife Pam, they set up some family foundations, which then emerged to be Omidyar Network and then Luminate and a range of others. So we're part of something called the Omidyar Group, which are funded by the Omidyar family. And it speaks to a number of issues that are really important today. Luminate's work does 2 things. We focus on participation and dissent. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that underrepresented groups, particularly women, young people, indigenous groups, ethnic minorities, and so on, are able to play a role in civic and political life. And also, we protect people who dissent, who complain, who challenge authority. They may be human rights workers, they may be civil society activists like yourselves, they could be people who are journalists, investigative journalists and others who try and push back against power and challenge authority. And then the second part of our work, and this is relevant more, I think, to the work that you're involved in, is about building a healthy information ecosystem. And that started off with supporting independent journalism, investigative journalism and others, as I say, to try and hold government accountable. But now, increasingly, it's about platform accountability. We're seeing the distortions that the social media companies and big tech platforms are playing in democratic discourse, whether it's the 2016 elections and the interference in the US, whether it's the rise of deep fakes, and mis and disinformation. This is a real problem and is going to get much worse. So we see our role in funding organizations who can work on those things. And that may be giving grants, it may be supporting individuals, it may be backing coalitions and initiatives and so on. And I can talk a little later about the model of philanthropy and what I think also is the appropriate role for private philanthropy in this big ecosystem.
Exactly. So yeah. So this is a little bit what we will touch today in our conversation. So what is Stephen and the group about? Where you invest in? You are sort of a venture capitalist, right? But also for civil society. So it's not only NGOs, but also for profit. I understand. Yeah. It's for technology, to foster technologies that helps us get out of this situation we are in here. And there's one, we had this discussion the other day where what has changed, because technology as it is neither good nor bad, right? but sort of many people have sensed a change in technology over the last few years. So we had an early beginning in the 2000s, 2010, then there's a 2000 to 2015, 2016, and then there's another area. And if you like, we dive a little bit into it. So what is your impression about this change environment of platforms, you mentioned it already, of information, access? How do you see it? Is it more positive, more negative now than 15 years ago?
I think much more negative. I mean, I think I was one of a group, and I know Pierre was, and many of our colleagues, who were the kind of, what they call the shiny-eyed Silicon Valley enthusiasts. Back in 2000, 2005, yeah, the people who thought, hey, let's invest in a platform, back an entrepreneur, and the world will change for the better. It was naive. And yes, of course, you can back entrepreneurs who change things really significantly. But also when you're dealing with really entrenched social and economic and political problems, backing an entrepreneur is not enough. It's part of the solution, and technology tools, of course, have developed sort of in an extraordinary way. When you think back to 20 years ago, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter. The sort of idea of instant messaging, which we now rely on every day with WhatsApp and so on, just didn't exist. So the whole information ecosystem has exploded. And going back to 2009, 2010, and then the Arab Spring in 2011, we thought, wow, this is such a force for good. It allows people to connect, and you heard the sort of rather over-claiming, I think, of the Arab Spring as the Facebook revolution, or the Twitter revolution.
Good PR.
Good PR, yeah. And of course, it put people together. It allowed people to connect for the first time around common causes. But it also allowed governments to surveil. Right. And it gave people instant access to what had been previously closed groups of human rights activists and so on. So that was the first warning sign we should have seen. But nothing was done to control the explosion in those social media platforms. And the US government, of course, is not one for regulation. But the power of the markets and of corporate America is such that it's really hands-off. And there's a difference, I think, between a European approach to regulation and a US approach, and we can come on to talk about that. And I think what we saw post-2011, 2012, and particularly I think when the platforms adopted advertising models, we then saw the development of what Shoshana Zuboff has called surveillance capitalism. Right. So because the whole point of the business model of these platforms is to hoover up your data, is to put you into groups of other people like yourself, men who wear red trousers who like going out to tapas in an evening in Madrid or whatever. Your whole life is tracked, surveilled, and is fed with recommendations. Now that's great if you want to shortcut a way of buying sneakers, but you don't want every single detail of your life being traded and expanded and so on and sold onto other businesses and platforms. And that surveillance capital model has got us to the situation now where mis and disinformation spreads. It's like somebody standing in a marketplace, this is an analogy somebody said, and whispering hate speech to their friends. And then what comes along, someone gives them a microphone and then tells everybody else who might be interested in that kind of speech to crowd into that corner, and then it amplifies. So what you've got here is the amplification of hate speech. We've seen this in a tragic way in places like Myanmar, in Sri Lanka, in Ethiopia, and so on, where Facebook is the internet. That is it. And there is no media literacy, there's no understanding of mis and disinformation, no way in which you can work through what is good and what is bad. And what is the truth is the thing that is here and is tradable and is up for grabs. And what we've seen now is this, as some commentators have called it, the era of post-truth. Yeah. Doesn't matter what you say. long as you say it loud enough, and as long as you say it to your group of people, and we've seen this, of course, in the US with kind of devastating consequences.
Elections will be one of our topics today, definitely. Yeah. There's a lot of elections coming up. But Stephen, you mentioned that you were that this is we are facing Facebook, Meta, all the big platforms, and so on. So having this huge global environment, what makes you tick at the morning when you wake up and have this David against Goliath feeling of how can we change this? Is it changeable?
Yeah.
And what is your motivation trigger?
I mean, it is changeable.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good start point.
But it also requires the willingness of people to take action. We've just done some research with a company called YouGov in the UK. It's a polling company. And what's interesting is that, and we do this in Germany, France, and the UK, to see what people's opinions were of social media platforms and also their trustworthiness. And also their concern about the development of generative AI and what does that mean for the future. And it came up with some extraordinary results. Let me just give you a couple of them here. I mean, firstly, it was saying that 70% of citizens in the UK and Germany who understood AI and deepfake technology said they're really concerned about the threat that it poses to elections. Similar numbers, I think, 54% in the UK, 44% in France, said that social media companies hurt democracy more than strengthening it. So I mention that because there is a start of an upswell of opinion. Okay, and we've seen a couple of sort of obviously tragic situations where public awareness becomes much more acute. We saw here in Spain, of course, the terrible stories about the deepfake technologies with the young women near Badajoz, I think. And in the UK, we've seen the situations where teenagers have taken their own lives as a result of information that's been fed to them through recommendations through Instagram on a constant sort of churn. So you're starting to see people become very suspicious. What is it that social media companies are doing to my data? How is it they're using it and farming it and selling it and so on? And then we're starting to see, and of course, in a very overblown way, this idea of what is the prospects for generative AI. So on one hand, you've got, yes, it's going to cure cancer, everybody's going to be fine, and then the other hand, you've got, oh, we're all going to die. So it's not going to be that. It's going to be kind of, there was going to be great improvements in productivity in some industries. It's going to have a massive impact on the labor markets over time and so on. But I mention all this to say that there is an opportunity through public opinion to put pressure on governments and regulators, who in turn will put pressure on the social media companies to change their model. Now also, let's not be naive. We're not talking about closing down Facebook or closing down Twitter or X, as it's called. But what you've got to do is to balance the respect for people's privacy and the control over their data with a business model. So you can still advertise, but it's that very highly targeted advertising model which is so destructive, not only for individual privacy, but also, as we're seeing, for the distortions it has on democracy.
Right. When we talk about democracy, we have to talk about elections, right? So elections, we have seen a lot of misinformation, one of your core topics you're battling with and you're supporting. I hope we can go into a few practical examples where you invest and what kind of projects you're supporting. But talking about the past and the current we have had, I've learned a lot about your background with Facebook, with Philippines, and the way you support local players to voice against dictatorship. What has changed from those last 5 years? We had now we have the war in Ukraine. Is there a change you have witnessed throughout these years, the last years? Is there a tipping point with with Ukraine, or is there a continuation? And what's your opinion about what we see next year in the several elections we will have upcoming?
Yeah, and I think 2024 is going to be a really critical year. It's the kind of year of elections. There's something like 65 elections taking place during 2024. I mean, of course, you've got the US election, and the outcome of that is really going to have a huge impact, I believe, on the war in Ukraine and the support from the US for that war. And then you've also got India, you've got Indonesia, you've got South Korea, you've got Taiwan, you've got the UK, you've got a bunch of other elections sort of coming up, and we need to watch really carefully the extent to which deepfake technology plays a part, in which mis and disinformation also plays a part. And it's important now that we start talking to the platforms to make sure they put in the right checks and balances. We know it's possible because they've done it before. But there's going to be, there needs to be real public pressure on those platforms to say, this is really important.
I've seen one of your interviews before where you talked about guardrails, setting guardrails in place to have, a controlled growth, right? Controlled growth and so overall like security for us as data owners. We should be data owners. What has been done? What is your discussions around this topic? You're talking to all these important organizations. You have been talking, and you are a frequent speaker as well. So, what is the conversation? What's the tone of your discussion? Is it positive, negative? Like doing, like we say in Spain, doing la cobra to avoid discussions?
No, I mean, and I think there's an inside and an outside game. So the outside game, if you like, is the public campaigning that we and a whole bunch of other organizations, and our role really is to fund organizations to do that. We're not doing a lot of that campaigning ourselves. We're part of different coalitions and different groups, whether they be in Brazil, whether they be in Indonesia or in Europe and so on, which are being supported to put pressure on the European Union, which essentially is the default super tech regulator or big tech regulator. The US, of course, as I've mentioned before, is reluctant to put constraints around the big tech companies. Although, I think with the rise of generative AI, there is this sense now that they need to act. But there is already legislation on the books, and the idea of actually setting up some regulatory agency in Washington from afresh is crazy. It takes 20 years. By that time, the horse has bolted, as we say. So it's about enforcement of existing regulation in the US and also in the EU about enforcement of existing regulation, plus also trying to find ways in which, particularly with generative AI, there's some kind of global governance discussion. But that also cannot be dictated by private companies. And the trouble at the moment is that the pace of legislation and regulation is too slow. And, as I'm sure you'll know yourself, government does not move at a fast pace. So it is important that pressure is put on the companies, and that can come from shareholders, that can also come from governments, it can come from regulators who already have that power to say, okay, what are you going to be doing about the elections? How are you going to stop hate speech? How are you going to stop the proliferation of this kind of mis and disinformation? There are checks and balances. You know you can do it. You need to have that will to do it. And if you don't, we're going to be giving you massive fines. Right. So there is something that can be done there. I think also, as I say, we see our role to some extent in de-risking new opportunities. So one of the things we're doing is we created in the UK the first data rights law firm, because there wasn't one. And this was becoming such a big issue. So there were individual lawyers who were, practiced in data law, who understood something about it, but there wasn't a firm that was doing it. So we helped create that and set that up. They are now taking Meta to court on a whole bunch of different things. So those are the kind of things that we can do to help.
Stephen, let's talk about budgets, because this is something I've learned here in my conversations with Stephen. Give us a sense of what we're talking about in terms of investment from one side and from the platform.
Yeah, I mean, just to give a, and I won't have up-to-date figures on the legal and funding.
Just more or
but
less.
I mean, for example, we as Luminate spend about $100 million a year on grants, and we work in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and also in Europe on the regulation of big tech and so on. So that sounds like a lot of money, but it is actually a relatively small amount of money compared to what big tech are spending just on legal and campaigning and lobbying. They are spending in the order of billions. So it's a little David and Goliath, as you'd mentioned before. And we also then need to make sure that we are in groups with other people. There are many others who are interested in these issues, whether they be consumer organizations, civil society organizations, legacy media, who obviously are having their sort of revenues completely stripped out by big tech. And civil society organizations around the world who are interested in this. The interesting thing, I think, is not to think about this just as a governance issue, because sometimes foundations, philanthropies, civil society organizations work in silos. But if you think about mis and disinformation, it cuts across every single issue. It happens in health. We saw this with COVID and the sort of scares around vaccines and vaccination. You see this around climate change, where there are climate deniers and the spread of mis and disinformation. So it's an issue that cuts across every single issue. And that's where imaginative coalitions need to be created and so on. But we're stacked up against huge companies with very, very deep pockets.
And the need for capital.
Yeah.
And to make turnaround, right? Turnover.
Yeah. Exactly.
So we have already mentioned a few projects, but I would love to go into like freedom of speech.
Yep.
And because I think it's a very important topic on your agenda. Mm-hmm. And would love to have you explain the audience a little bit more how you interact with actors and how maybe our audience could become part of a movement, or how do they engage with philanthropists, because this is always, Yolanda, you know it, funding for projects is always a challenge, and we have in the last few years, thanks to tech, there has been a huge amount of capital and wealth generated in a very short period of time, thanks to tech. And people want to give back, but how can we bring together those who need help and those who can offer this help?
We had a slide at some point, which not just my face, but which was Maria Ressa. I don't know whether these.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So many of you will know Maria Ressa, who's
who knows Maria Ressa in the audience? Okay.
There's a group. So Maria Ressa is a Filipino journalist who, with Dmitry Muratov in 2021, won the Nobel Peace Prize for her work to support journalists. I first met her about 12 years ago in the Philippines when she'd first set up her own digital media platform called Rappler. She was previously the bureau chief in Singapore for CNN, also in Indonesia as well. She's a very experienced journalist over 30 years, covering South and Southeast Asia. She decided in 2012 to set up her own media platform, and Rappler was a very fast-moving investigative journalists sort of platform, which became very, very quickly, I think it was the third most watched or viewed and popular media platform in the Philippines. Now, we invested, you mentioned about for-profit activities. We don't do so much of that now, but back in 2012, we were making equity investments into independent media companies and a whole bunch of other companies that had a social impact, tech companies and so on. And we were investors, along with a bunch of others, into Rappler. That was then, just before President Duterte came in the Philippines. I think he came in about 2016. And then the whole situation in the Philippines became very very difficult for Maria and for Rappler. And this was a good example of a populist. And populists, we've seen them in Turkey in Erdogan, we've seen them with Orban in Hungary, Trump in the US, and so on. They are very adept at hollowing out the institutions of the state, and also starting to challenge some of the institutions that put in checks and balances, the judiciary, independent media, and so on, which are the guardrails, the things that we rely on when authoritarians and when dictators take over. So Maria suddenly started, and Rappler started to become the focus of President Duterte's criticisms, because they were very critical of the Duterte regime. He called them out in his State of the Union address as owned by foreigners. And there was an obscure Filipino law which has limits on foreign ownership and foreign intervention and so on and so forth. He then started to use the law to persecute and to shut down the media company. And Maria at one point faced 13 lawsuits and 80 years in prison as a result of the Duterte's regime and what they were trying to do. What's extraordinary about her is she fought back. She didn't leave the Philippines, she stayed there, and she continued to publish against all odds. She had travel bans, they were fining her, they were accusing her of tax evasion, a whole bunch of different things. And these are, again, where the law is starting to become politicized. And that's when you've got to really worry. What's great, over the last couple of years, obviously Duterte left office a year or two ago. You haven't got a fantastic regime in the Philippines with Marcos Jr. Now there, but at least they're starting to drop the cases. And so 10 of those 13 cases have now been dropped. She's still got 3 outstanding. But she's a great example of fighting back.
Right.
And that's
pushing the line, right?
Pushing the line, holding the line is the campaign that she has. And she's also published a 10-point plan with Dmitry Muratov, which is how to tackle mis and disinformation. And that covers a lot of the issues that I've been talking about before. Right. So I encourage you to just look up the 10-point plan. It's a Nobel Prize, it's on the Nobel Summit website, it has its own website and so on. And that gives a prescription for action. So those are the kind of things we support.
We have a video. I was just told that we have a small video.
Oh, okay. This should have been played at the beginning, but don't worry. It doesn't matter. It's
never too late.
We'll just tell you what Luminate does.
I hope this was a small summary of what we have been talking about. Jorge, how's the time? Shall we give over the micro to the audience? 5 minutos? Okay. Okay, hey, questions, please. This is part of Empodera. We have this close relation between us and the audience here, so please ask your questions. This is the moment.
Hi, I'm Patricio Del Boca from the Open Knowledge Foundation. Thank you for the talk. Just in the last slide, it said it talk about important decisions and decisions of the people, and you talk a lot about elections. And ultimately, the most important decision, or one of the most important decisions, is who is going to govern us. So in the past years, all the capital storms in Brazil, USA, and Bolivia were founded in the misinformation of elections are fraud, and there are fraud in our elections. So I want to ask you, Stephen, in your view, what role could play technology in make elections more transparent, more accessible, more participatory for the public to strengthen that core decision of our democracy, which is elections?
Great. Okay, that's a great question. And there are many, and I'm sure there are many of you here who are involved very much in providing voters with, reliable, independent information about candidates. One of the things that we've supported is a group called Open Cities Lab in South Africa, who've developed an app called My Candidate, which is basically a white label app that has now been used in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Namibia, in about 18 countries through sub-Saharan Africa. And it basically can provide people with independent information. And we've seen this with sort of alternative vote tabulations as well. In the Nigerian elections earlier this year, there was a very effective use of alternative vote tabulations as well. So it's those kind of tools, I think, that are really important, as well as supporting independent media platforms, investigative journalism, so on, to kind of speak truth about candidates. One of the shocking things I found, I think, a few years ago in India was that, I can't remember the exact percentage, but a quite substantial number of people who are running for parliament in India had got criminal records. And it kind of didn't really matter too much because they would kind of sweep them over, and people just kind of weren't aware of this. It's not 50% or anything, but there were a kind of small group of people, and certainly people with criminal records were not prohibited for running for office, people who've been convicted of corruption and so on, and organised crime was involved in supporting candidates and that sort of. So shedding light on that information, I think technology has a really important role to play.
Great question. Thank you. More over there, up there. Venga, Jorge.
It's going to run.
No, because of interpreters.
So thank you very much for your insight. It was really interesting. And one of the things that I feel a bit worried about for especially the younger generations, but also older people that are Facebook users, for example, is that the video content that they consume in these platforms, it's extremely radicalizing. You watch this little clip, this little video about maybe Ben Shapiro thinking about something, and suddenly you have a lot of anti-COVID vaccine in all your media. Platforms don't want to do anything about this because they make a profit out of it. And governments, as you mentioned before, are being really slow. So what can we do in a kind way to approach these people that are not educated enough to say, hey, maybe you should be more mindful of what you're consuming. Try to balance it, try to wonder if what you're watching is actually the actual truth.
I couldn't quite hear, but from what I think you were saying was that kind of what is it that individuals can do or civil society organizations can do to also combat mis and disinformation. I mean, I think, campaigning groups are really important. And as I was saying before, I think this cuts across every sector, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's around climate and so on. So creating coalitions with civil society organizations, being able at a national level also to be able to talk to the platforms and to say, for example, if there's elections coming up in Spain, when the next ones are, what is the role of civil society as a group? And this group here is a great example of people who share common interests. And there is an organizing structure where you can actually approach, if you approach as one organization or one individual to Facebook, you're never going to get through the door. If you're doing it as 150 organizations with a combined backing of 2 million people who've signed up to a petition or whatever, they'll take more, pay more attention. Speak to your MPs, speak to your parliamentarians, and so on. There are ways in which ordinary people can fight back. And I think some of the sort of tragic situations we've seen here in Spain just in the last week or so, I think are good examples of where there is public outrage, of where people are saying, hold on a second, this is not right. This is dangerous. And then the media and the parliamentarians and government will be forced to act. That's the most you can do, but you do have power. It sounds as though you've got 200 people here who are individuals, but actually this is 200 people representing hundreds of thousands of other people.
Right. That is basically why we are all here, right? To listen and to bring that kind of information we hear here and through the connections back home, and then think about our day-to-day, right? This is our goal here, the goal of Yolanda and Jorge. More questions over there. One more.
Hi, Stephen. Mentioning the COVID thing, one thing, I think what you're doing is really important, but I'm also concerned that even fighting against disinformation, misinformation, we've seen with COVID and other things that experts were silenced because they didn't follow the mainstream view. And I think it's very important that we don't forget that. I'm not saying one side is right or the other side is right, but it's very important to have a balance because there were many, many, many medical experts, epidemiologists, etc. That's just one example with COVID. This happens in many situations. And there was no debate. Like online, there was no debate because the media's controlled and it's all what did the World Health Organization and the governments, what was their narrative. So just, is that something that you integrate already that will be integrated in the whole policy? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there is rarely a right answer to everything or one single view. And I think what certainly our approach to the work we do, for example, on either combating misinformation or supporting journalism, supporting healthy debate, is exactly that, is to have that debate. So you don't have one view that is either a government view. If you're living in Putin's Russia, you have one view. There is no debate at all. So what is important, I think, and is a really central tenet of liberal democratic societies, is that ability to push back and debate. So that, and again, COVID and vaccinations is a very complicated set of topics, and I'm not a health expert by any means. So what I think is really important here is that we allow a plurality of voices. And that is what I think has got to happen, if we want to have a healthy society, is that you have to debate, you have to challenge, you have to be able to understand a plurality of views. And I think part of the problem with the social media companies and the surveillance capitalism model is that it drives you down into one set of opinions, which are reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. And it's very rare you have access to other information. So absolutely, in terms of your question, is this something we support? We absolutely want to see a plurality of opinions.
We have come to an end. Thanks a lot. The first
Thank you.
initial conference here. As always, in Empodera, please use the opportunity to stay here. Stephen will go, but the rest of people, we are here. Use it and connect with each other. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.